Do you like the Oakland A's? Are you a fan of the Golden Knights? Do you love the Los Angeles Chargers? Well then, my friend, you're in the right place. This is the Snake Sports Talk Show with your host, Jake the Snake Silva, brought to you by the Spotlight Sports Network.
I think we all know when we're working at companies, we're working at corporations. You have CEOs, you have managers, you have your top dogs. You have your tops of the totem pole. These are the ones that are absolutely movers and shakers. These are the ones who make the dream happen. Because it initially started so small, they worked their way to get to it, did take a lot of sacrifices, did take a lot of cuts, but they managed to get here. Here's what's interesting. It's all within a team effort. That's what it takes for a business to be successful, a relationship to grow closer and stronger with two people. And on top of that, you also have, in the sports world, the owner, the general manager, the head coach, and then you have the entire team. What's going on, Prince John? And here's what's interesting about this. So, fellow NBA great, mostly known from the Chicago Bulls, Scottie Pippen, started to come out with something that I thought was really, really interesting. Now, I know that there were certain comments that were actually said prior to this. But let me just tell you exactly what was going on all throughout the so-called Twitter sphere. Here's the thing that I will say. So what was happening in the Twitter sphere? So Scottie Pippen, of course, was going back and forth with Stephen A. Smith. And basically saying that LeBron James won a championship without any help. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that really interesting? This is coming from someone, not just anybody, but an NBA great, that when you watched him in the early years in Chicago, okay, Chicago was not built to its best extent like it was at that time. It was not. Michael was fresh out of North Carolina and was not, this is where it's not a knock. This is more of just seeing it from my very own eyes. But Michael was never really the talented basketball player. He was more of the guy who put in the work. He worked hard. He went to the gym. And at the same time, went and practiced on his shots. So he was working. He was a workhorse. He was able to get, to overcome a lot of obstacles to get to this point. You could even look at the histories of Michael Jordan. His brothers, he didn't grow up with a sister. He grew up with brothers. And at that time, they pushed him around, tossed him everywhere, played basketball, shoved him close, and threw a lot of defensive shots at him. That was how he learned. Was not the most talented. Not like some of these players like LeBron James or Kevin Durant or, even Steph Curry. A lot of these game changers within the NBA in this era. But that was fine. The funny thing of it is that ultimately, and Kobe was a one of a kind. A kid out of high school, out of Lower Merion, and Charlotte shoots themselves in the foot every day because of the fact that they let one of the greatest go to the Lakers, and then 20 years later was an absolute legend. Still is to this day. But one thing you got to look at with Scottie Pippen, and here was the response from Stephen A. And I quote, "With all due respect, my brother, this is ridiculous. D. Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami, Kyrie and Kevin Love in Cleveland, and Anthony Davis with the Lakers. What the hell is the matter with you? You know basketball. You're a 6-time champion. How could you utter such blasphemy? The infamous Stephen A. Smith, always catching blasphemy wherever he finds it, right? Oh, there's a blasphemy. How could you possibly speak this in front of me? Let me just break something down to you. Okay. Here's my thing. Scottie Pippen's a legend. Absolutely. But remember something. Scottie could not have won a championship by himself without Michael. And Michael couldn't win a championship without Scottie. Didn't we all learn this from The Last Dance? We've watched it all throughout the episodes. So when stuff like this came out, I thought it was really interesting. And then not to mention the comments that he made with the Chicago Bulls with Phil Jackson and then Steve Kerr, Tony Kukoc. I couldn't believe it. And this is somebody who was one of the best Robins to Michael Jordan. Look at all throughout the NBA championships ever. No one won them solo. And here's the other takeaway. And you really thought that Bill Russell won by himself? Sure, he did. But then he also had some specialists, like Havlicek was one of the best defensive specialists for Boston. I mean, I met the guy before once in my lifetime. The guy's taller than me. I look like I'm looking at a ceiling. Like that's how I looked at Bill Russell when I first met him. Great guy. Golfs up out here most of the time here in Vegas. He loves it. But Bill Russell, because of his size and because of his play, we don't talk about it a whole lot. The fact that he was Mr. Celtic, he was also somebody who won majority of championships. We don't talk about it a whole lot. Everybody will think, well, what about Wilt Chamberlain? Wilt Chamberlain couldn't even try to do it himself, even though he was very talented. Wilt Chamberlain was not that guy, because that wasn't until you had to have the right pieces around him. Magic just so happened to be one of the most unbelievable players, offensively and defensively. And then comes Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And then they won multiple championships. Larry Bird had his sidekick. Boston won multiple championships. Everybody had a Robin next to them. Kobe and Shaq. They've won multiple championships with the Lakers. Once Shaq left, Kobe ended up recruiting Pau Gasol, and they won more championships. Everybody gets kind of drawn into this thought, this feeling, that because LeBron James, the 1 year that he didn't have anybody, got them to the finals, but they didn't win it. In Cleveland, they lost to San Antonio. And San Antonio, mind you, had a whole group. Greg Popovich, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker. That was a whole group. That's what won a championship. And it blows my mind just hearing this and seeing this. Because remember, if we learned anything through The Last Dance during the shutdown, is that this whole group was magnificent. It was unstoppable. Before them, it was Isaiah Thomas and the Detroit Bad Boys. Michael could not get past them by himself. That's when Scottie arrived. Then eventually came Dennis Rodman. And then Steve Kerr. Eventually Tony Kukoc. And then a bunch of others. They were not a terrible team. They just couldn't get past the hump. Because in order to be, quote unquote, champions, it's not a solo gig. It's a teamwork effort. It's a teamwork effort. It's been like that, and it's always been like that. And it always will be. Look at the NBA final, or the NBA East, the conference finals right now. Devin Booker And the Phoenix Suns, how they got to this point was the fact that Chris Paul, a veteran who took Oklahoma City to the playoffs, who also helped out the Houston Rockets to get to as far as they could until an injury happened and then they get knocked off, but has had the opportunity to work with a youngster like Devin Booker, and they're in the Western Conference Final, leading 3-1 against the Clippers. How about Milwaukee? I know a lot of people will be saying a lot about Chris Middleton, so do I. But Chris Middleton is not a reliable number 2 in any of the other teams except for Milwaukee. If he was in a big 3, he'd be a 3 in a heartbeat. If he was in a big time super team, he'd be a number 4. But Chris Middleton had to overcome those obstacles in order for him to really pick up Giannis. So when I look at this from this general perspective, LeBron James is arguably one of the greatest players that we've ever seen in history. Absolutely. Well, yeah, and John Stockton and Karl Malone. But here was the difference, though. They didn't make it far enough to win an NBA title. That was the unfortunate part for Utah. Even though that was such a great group, that was such a dynamic duo, they just couldn't do it. Because Karl Malone, at that time, moved to the Lakers to try to get a title. That's what it was all about. Gary Payton was just about the same way when you had him and Sean Kemp. So that's my thing. There is nowhere written there where it's a solo gig. If that was the case, then a lot more teams would be winning more championships now than ever before, right? That's what it would be. But it's not. So this thing about, LeBron James not having any help, really? I'm pretty sure that in the beginning of his career in Cleveland, he needed all the help he could get. He still couldn't get it. Then he goes to Miami, gets help from Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, Shane Battier, Ray Allen, and Mario Chalmers, and so many others. Goes back to Cleveland, gets help from Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, J.R. Smith, Kyle Korver, lots of players. And they won it. Goes to the Lakers. Says, I can't do it with this young group. I need veteran presence. Get Anthony Davis. They win a championship in 2020. Listen, you could be the best basketball player that's ever walked the face of this earth. But to seriously win a championship, to separate yourselves from the boys to the men, everybody needs help. That's what makes the dream work. You got to have teamwork in the middle of the mix. Otherwise, you're not going to win a championship. It's the bottom line. Utah will not win a championship unless they get somebody up out there, excluding Mike Conley, to help out Donovan Mitchell so that they are not so Donovan Mitchell reliant. The Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic is probably one of the best, exciting young players to even play in the NBA. He needs help. And from what I'm being told, it's not working with Kristaps Porzingis. So he needs more. Damian Lillard, which I'll be explaining about later. He needs help. Probably one of the best generational talents you'll ever see in the NBA. Needs help. Portland has been a snake-bitten organization for so long that they can't even get over the hump to win the championship. And it's sad. It's unfortunate. The Clippers, Kawhi Leonard is a silent assassin for a reason, but he's not verbal. You can't build yourself upon that. So they need another veteran presence or somebody that's a vocal leader that's willing to speak up and maybe get the Clippers over the hump. But they're not going to be better than the Lakers. This whole thing, like, if the Clippers win, they're like, the Clippers are still over. It's not going to change a thing about LA Town. It's not. The Clippers are going to basically be themselves, just with a championship. So I just felt like this was absolute, utter ridiculousness from one of the NBA greats to be speaking out like this And mind you, Kevin Durant is very talented. But of course, if he wanted to win more championships, he would have never left Golden State. Wanted to prove that he can win it without it. But you have Kyrie who flakes too much. You have James Harden that you don't even know if he's healthy on the floor. And all of this stuff. So it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.